What is up everyone? Welcome back to another video today, and in this video I have another model comparison for you guys. Today I'll be comparing all three of the Gemini Jets 1 to 400 scale American Airlines Airbus A320 releases. I just picked up the first release about a week ago now, and seeing as I have all three of the American A320 releases that Gemini Jets has done, I figured it'd be appropriate to compare them all and see how it's changed over the years. So here on the left I've got the first release, which is my latest acquisition. This was released in 2017. Then we have the second release from 2020 with the IAE engines, and then the third release from 2022, which had the CFM engines on it, so the second CFM release in this case. Now normally I don't collect, not necessarily like duplicates, but like the same aircraft and airline, the same aircraft type and airline in my collection if I've already got one, unless it's like a different engine type and it's necessary for me to have the different engine types, or you know, with rare exceptions like if it has sentimental value, which the first release does. If you want to see what that's all about, check out the unboxing as I explain that in a little more detail. So that's why I got it, and therefore I've got all three of the releases. Before we check out the models, let's take a look at the boxes themselves. Now, there isn't many differences with these boxes here, but since the first release was done in 2017, you can see that the Made for Collectors by Collectors is in a different font and position on the top of the box compared to the later releases, where you can see they got moved to the right and got put with a sans serif font instead. Also, the Airbus A320 logo is a little smaller, and the American Airlines logo is also a little bit adjusted as well on the flap. And then I'll bring in the first and third releases to do sort of a side-by-side box comparison where you can see the differences in the Gemini Jets boxes from before about 2019 or so and the current ones that we have today. So they just moved around a couple of things, changed the font, and made a couple modifications to the template. And ignore that little sticker there, that's just a waffle database number that he has on all of his models, because I got it from there off of a big collection sale. Here is the top of the box, and again, I need to find a much better place for this, so let me put it right here since I'm done with it for now. So here's the top of each of these boxes. You have the old release on the bottom, new release on the top. And then the sides of the boxes, you can see, again, just a couple changes to the format have been made. And then here, this is about the same, but of course the text has changed a little bit, and also the Gemini Jets logo has been resized accordingly. So that's how the boxes have sort of evolved over the years, and the second release is basically the same as this, albeit with just a different graphic on it for the IAE engines. So now, let's go ahead and bring in the models and we'll compare all of them. So here we are, all of my American A320s in my collection from Gemini Jets. So you can see the older releases are on the left, the newer ones are on the right, so that's how I have it lined up. And the first thing that we'll take a look at here is the color. Now, Gemini Jets has been pretty inconsistent with the American Airlines color, especially on the mainline aircraft. The wide bodies are pretty okay on, but the narrow bodies and the regional aircraft, that's where they have really struggled, because, you know, on one release it'll be fine, and then the next release it's just, oh my god, it's awful. And you look at that second release right there, I mean, that color looks like it sat in the oven for too long, it got cooked. And then the third release, it's a little better, but it's still not exactly perfect. Now, I wouldn't say that the first release is 100% perfect either, but it is the closest that I've seen on these 320s. So overall, I would prefer the first release for the color just based off of that, if I was picking which A320 to have based on color alone. Now check out the tops of each of these aircraft, which have a couple different modifications that have been made to them over the years. So here is the first release 320, November 117 Uniform Whiskey, which has two antennas, one up here just above the L1 door, and then one back here just behind the wings, and then a printed beacon light and a couple other printed details. And then we take a look at the second release made in 2020, which is supposed to have two antennas, but mine is missing this middle one right here, which they moved it to just at the front of the wings. And then that first antenna has been moved back just a little bit. They also did add the Wi-Fi dome on this release, which looks pretty good. And I'd say it's the best one out of this batch, because the third one, which is right down here, doesn't look exactly perfect. It's a little chipped right there on that side. But both antennas are present on this model, and they're in the same positions as the second release. Now we have the underside of all three of these aircraft. We'll go and take a look at that first release, and again, the color is very present across all of these, so you'll see the color difference across these models. Now on the first release A320, we can see that there isn't an antenna that's located on the underneath of the aircraft, whereas on the other two releases, they decided to omit that from their later releases. And I remember speaking with Todd at Airliners International last year, and there was an explanation for why he didn't want to do it. Can't remember it exactly off the top of my head, so I don't want to, don't quote me on it, but there was some explanation from Todd as to why they decided to remove some of the antennas on the models. And I think it went along the lines of, sometimes they fall out and it can be hard to fix them. On one hand, I can understand that, but on the other hand, it is kind of easy to fix it once you get the hang of it. But the downside is that these antennas are so freaking small that when you do lose them, they're almost impossible to find, especially if you've got like a tile floor or something, or even, carpet like I have. It can still be pretty difficult to find, even if the carpet is the opposite color of what the antennas are supposed to be. So you can see on the second release, there are no antennas, but plenty of printed details to go about. And the same case goes for the latest release. And one of the more important aspects when you're comparing the Gemini JC A320 between one another from older to newer releases is to take a look at just the nose shape and, of course, the engine size. So let me go ahead and get the camera leveled so you can see it a little better. First release is on the left, the latest release is on the right, and you can see that the nose shape is about the same. I would say that the latest release has more of a slope on the top of the nose, so it looks a little more interesting, for lack of a better term, on the latest release. You can also see the nose gear is a lot more refined, and it looks much better on the older release than it does on the newer. Like the hub, I don't know what's going on with the hub. It looks like it's trying to mold itself out of its designated area and is affecting the rubber on the tire. So not exactly ideal, but that's just kind of how it is. So what can you do? And then we'll take a look here at the engine sizes, which don't know best way not to do it from this point, but to do it kind of like this. So here is a good look at the engine comparison, and you can see the size is basically identical compared to the first and latest releases. So they have not yet changed the engine size, though I have heard that JC is supposed to be working on a refined mold for the A320 and also the 737, because that mold gets a lot of complaints from collectors too. I have yet to hear any updates about that, so we'll see if that does come to fruition, but I do know that developing a mold can take quite a bit of time, so I imagine maybe they're getting held up in the process somewhere if they are working on it, or something else is going on, I don't know. But hard to say for sure because it's very secretive when it comes to that kind of stuff in this hobby. Go ahead and flip it around here and we'll compare the tail sections, where the color difference is quite astonishing, even on the tail area here. The first release definitely has the best tail color out of the bunch. The blue just seems a lot more, I don't know, like saturated or something. That's kind of how I like to put it. And on the third release, it looks like it's been bleached a little bit on that blue. The red and the gray and everything, that looks fine on the latest release too, but I would definitely prefer the first release right here if I was going for the color more than anything else. And then I'll bring in the second release as well. I left that out because obviously that has a different engine type, but you can see on the second release, it's definitely there. It's a little different. I would say it's a little shade darker or so on this one than on the first release, but not a stark contrast compared to the latest release from 2022, which has quite the interesting difference in the color there. So that's how it is on that aircraft. You can also see the front profile for both of the CFM 320s. You can see it's a little bit different. I would say we'll put them side by side here so you can see a little better to see if the wing flex has changed. And it looks like it has adapted a little bit on that newer release, if I can get that to focus here and just make sure. Yeah, so on the newer release, which is on the right, you can see that the wings are angled up just a little bit higher than on the first release. And you can definitely see that the engines, they're a lot better on that first release than on the third. It looks like the cowlings have been scraped on a little interestingly there, so I don't know exactly what happened in that process, but yeah, you can definitely see that this first release looks a lot more refined, and it definitely looks much better on the engines there and on the wings, even if the engines are still big on this one than it was on prior Airbus releases that Gemini did, which I don't know why JC had to update it and make the engine so big on the CFMs. There wasn't really anything wrong with the mold necessarily, but I get that they had to update it just to add, you know, like rolling gears and antennas and whatnot, and to make it more of a slot-in wing mold instead of the single cradle piece mold that has been used for many years and was getting outdated to that point. So, you know, it is what it is. What can you do with that, really? Not too much I can really do except, buy other manufacturers if it really comes down to that. But since Gemini has been the one to make a lot of stuff that I want, admittedly, I've still been going to them for a lot of my purchases, even if their molds are not exactly perfect. So there's all the nose shapes. There's a jet that was taken off. So there's all the nose shapes for the American A320s, and you can see that second release I just stuck there in the middle, just to get a nice little ending here, a nice little outro clip for the end of this model comparison. Very happy to have all three of these American A320s. It's definitely a pleasure to have them all, and especially this first release right here, which has quite a bit of sentimental value. The second release, obviously my first one that I got for the American A320, and then the third release, just so I can add that CFM into my collection, so I have both engine types, and then obviously the first release coming the latest because of that sentimental value that it has. Only on my second ever flight that I took. What are the odds of that? But anywho, that's all I've got for this comparison. My recommendation would be, if you want to get any of these American 320s, my recommendation is, if you want a Gemini one, I'd say go for the first release. But if you just want one right away, then obviously you would want to go for the latest release, since that one is the easiest to find out of the bunch. I'm not sure how common the IAE 320 is anymore, though. That may be just as hard to find as that first release and whatnot. But if you are really looking for a better quality model, then at that point I would just wait for NG to release it, which Lord knows when that's going to be, given their release pattern at this point, because really the only US Airbuses I've seen them do have been Spirit and Delta. I know they did a couple American 321s in the past with the Standard to Cancer, regular delivery, and also Flagship Valor, all with sharklets. So hopefully they do some like the 320s and 319s at some point, because I know there have been tons of collectors who have passed on the Gemini releases because of the issues with this mold, and there are those waiting for NG to do it, and I imagine there is some impatience when it comes to that, because obviously you got a lot of people been waiting a while for NG to do some of these planes that Gemini has had, and those collectors skipping out on it because of the fact that these molds are not exactly the greatest out there. So with that being said, that is the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next video.